right, let's take a look at a demo here. We're going to go ahead and look at payment transactions, asset configuration, asset transfer, and an application call, no op. Okay, in this first demonstration, we are going to take a look at a few different types of transactions all in one program. We're going to look at those transactions that revolve around assets and another one that revolves around regular payments for algos. And what I've done here is I've created a couple of accounts, one for Bob, one for Alice. And the first one is going to call a method here we're going to dive into that's going to actually create an asset. So we'll take a look at the transaction that does that. Then next after that, we're going to transfer some algos to Bob from Alice's account. And then next we'll go to opting in, and Bob's going to opt in order to receive the asset. And then down here, we're going to transfer the asset to Bob. All right, so that's going to be an asset transfer transaction. And then what we're going to do is Bob is going to transfer it back to Alice so that we can destroy the asset and show you what that transaction looks like as well, because you need to have all of the assets in the account in order to destroy them. Then finally, we're going to close the account using the closeout parameter for payment transactions for both Alice and Bob. So those accounts should have the zero balance at the end as well. All right, so let's go ahead and continue here. Okay, so I'm going to hit my breakpoint here for the first function, which is to create an asset. And here is the transaction we're constructing to do this. And this is, you can see all of the fields that are required when you're creating an asset. You need the name, there's a clawback address, the number of decimals, whether it's frozen or not. Valid first round and valid last round are in here. So these are 1,000 apart. So 1,000 blocks you get to do the transaction. If you need to go outside of that range, you need to schedule it. There are ways in the documentation that show how to estimate the timing of the rounds. And then also you can see the fee here, the first valid round, and the freeze address, the Genesis hash, the testnet I'm going out to for this one, and then also the last, the total amount that we're going to create here. We're going to do 1,000 of these. There's the unit name, and then we have a URL. So these were all passed in to this transaction parameter. You can see all the different fields here that you just saw make up that transaction. So there you can see down below the output, we have the actual asset ID. There's the one that ends there in 74 was actually created. And now we're going to go ahead and transfer algos to Bob. So this is going to involve a regular payment, algo payment. So Alice has some algos in her account, and she's going to send them over to Bob. And here you can see the unsigned transaction. And this, we got the payment amount. You can see we're going to send over 203,000 micro algos. There's no close remainder to. There's a first valid round again. And then down here you can see the receiver account and then the sender account as well, and the transaction type of pay. So then you see that was successful, and you can see the transaction information printed out down below with that amount that we listed, as well as all the other information that remains the same. Next up, we're going to go ahead and opt in order to receive the asset. So now we have to opt into the ASA. So Bob's going to go ahead and opt in. And the trick here is just setting the amount to 0. So you've got the Bob is the sender and the receiver. And that's it. And then we also are specifying asset ID is a parameter that we created a little while ago. Okay, so now that was successful. You can see it was confirmed in that round that we have listed. And you can see I've got 0 of these so far. Now we're going to go ahead and do a transfer. And we're going to transfer this asset this time. Last time we transferred algos, this time we're going to transfer an asset. So here we can see we've got the information in the transaction. We're going to transfer 100 of these coins that Alice created. And we're going to send them to Bob's account, which is right down here below. And there is the asset transfer type. All right. And next we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to reverse it. We're going to send it from Bob to Alice. And this is so we can get all of the assets back to Alice's account so we can do that destroy, which is coming up next. So again, everything looks pretty much the same, except two things. One is that the sender and receiver have been flipped around. And then also, you notice there is a close assets to. So this is going to close it out. And this will have a value of 0 in the sending account when it's all said and done. All right, and what we list down here in the output window is now the balance in the Alice's account. And you can see the that she has all 1,000 back again. So now she's got all 1,000, we can go ahead and destroy that. So let's take a look at this. This is going to use the asset configuration transaction. So that is the same method that we called when we created it up here. So again, these differ by some of the fields that are used in terms of what it actually accomplishes. All right, so this time what we got here is an asset config transaction. The sender is going to be Alice. There's the asset ID, and then that's it, and that'll go ahead and destroy it. Take a look at the contents. The index is the asset ID that you see there, and nothing else is specified, and that's an asset config. Okay, so now that particular token is destroyed. So let's go back to the account and close out the account, and then we're going to do both of these with the payment transaction using the close remainder to on the account itself. All right, so here you can see the close remainder to is set, and we're going to send this back to the dispenser. This HZ57 account is the dispenser. And then you can see that specified up here as a parameter. So the receiver and then the closeout is the fifth parameter in the payment transaction method call here. All right, and then the last thing is be to close the account for Bob. Okay, so that's it for that demo. There are a lot of different transaction types in there between asset transactions and pay transactions. Okay, so this next demo, we're going to look at application calls with the various phases of onComplete. So the first thing I want to point out here is we have two approval programs in the code. The first is the one we're looking at right here. This is our initial set of code, and it's basically just a accumulator. It goes ahead and adds in some counters. And then there is a second one that we have, which is refactored, and we're going to add in some additional capability in this one to pass in a timestamp as an argument. And so this is going to be using the update method, and we'll see what the transaction looks like there. So here's the logic that we're going to do now. We're going to go ahead and create the app ID and deploy the application with the approval program that we read in up above, as well as these other parameters, the clear program, the global schema, the local schema, which was also specified up here. So there's all the schema information. And then the next step is going to be calling the application without the arguments. And one other thing I wanted to point out here, typical code you would see here in teal would be branching on what happens, on completion, right? So it's going to take a look at that on completion code, and it's going to detect, okay, is this an opt-in or is this a closeout or what is it? So this is boilerplate, and you would have methods that would be associated with each one of those in your teal. Okay, let's hit the run button. We're going to go into our first routine here, which is to create the application. And let's take a look at the transaction. You can see in the transaction, we've got the valid first round. We don't have any foreign apps or foreign assets. We don't have an index yet because we haven't deployed it. And then you can see here we've got the sender, and the type is always going to be APPL for application and all of these. So we just hit run. All right, so there's the new app ID. You can see down in the output box terminal, 154704736. So now we're going to take that app ID and use it in all subsequent calls as a parameter. Next, we're going to call the application without any arguments. So here we're going to use the application no-op transaction. You can see the onComplete is 0, which is a no-op call. And we got the index, which again is the ID of the application. And that's all we got to do. So in summary, we saw how to create transactions in the demos by using the Python SDK. And transactions are made up of several different types. There are 7 types of transactions. Payment transaction, also a key registration transaction, asset configuration, as well as the asset freeze and asset transfer. Then we saw the application call with the different life cycle of application on completes, and then also there is a state proof one that is done by the consensus. We saw how to read them using the goal command line tool, and then also the SDK debugger in VS Code. Finally, we saw the transaction work by specifying a range of blocks to execute and passing the appropriate parameters. We also saw how to invoke them using corresponding methods in the SDKs. You can find more examples in other languages in the link tree, as well as several other transaction resources that you see with the QR code and link here. And here's link code. We see you've got the link to the source code that we just showed you, the deck signature docs, as well as transaction docs. So I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it.